starting, Sri Lanka tourism is right now at a very zero level, or we are picking up. Madam Krimali Fernando has the biggest task and biggest challenge to you, madam. So you have done a lot for Sri Lanka tourism for little time. For last 9 months, cabinet approved promotional plan, which we never had it for 5 years, and some ground rules. You are trying to keep your house in order. Being a lady, how do you face this challenge in the industry?
Thank you. Lady or gent, the challenge is the same. But let me just explain to you. No, from January when I took over the job, we didn't have COVID at that point. So immediately we went for the global promotion campaign, as you correctly said, and we got the approval from the cabinet, which was a 5-year approval. Of course, in late January, COVID started in China, and we, in a way, we thought, okay, it's kind of, a lot of the world thought it's a China problem, right? So a lot of people didn't focus on it at first. But then, end of January, beginning of February, we had our first Chinese lady, 45-year-old lady who got COVID. And now, of course, as you all know, she recovered and she's gone back. So that was our first exposure to COVID. At that time, the president set up the COVID task force, which several of us were involved. And we were asked to put quarantine centers and all that. So early action, I think, was taken. I think doctors, all of them have explained that better than me. Where the WHO announced that it was a pandemic, I think it was in March, 14th or 11th of March, right? So on the 11th of March, we had about 80,000 tourists in our country. 80,000, right? 80,000 tourists in our country. So first action plan was to, what do we do to help them, right? So we had to, we were in touch with the embassies, how to get them back. We had a 24-hour call center. We had transport arranged. There were people who treated Sri Lankans, who treated the tourists really well. But we did have some situations where they were not treated well as well. So we had to handle that kind of a situation. Tourist police were involved. So that was our first action plan. How do we handle tourists immediately? Then we looked at how do we help our own people in the industry who's invested. So we went to the cabinet and suggested various wage support schemes with regard to the leases, electricity bills. I don't want to go into the detail, but the cabinet, of course, approved everything. We are still working on with banks how to implement. Some banks are more supportive than the others and so on. So we are in the process of implementing how to support the industry immediately, how to pay their wages, how to do that. Then, of course, we looked at the guidelines. How do we open? How do we, eventually when we open, how are we going to do that? So, of course, some people are seated here. Dr. Prasad, who's here, he's seated on the second row. He was one of the main authors of this guideline. There was a lot of research done on this on Singapore and some of the other countries. And we created a guideline to certify hotels so that they are meeting the requirements for COVID. So thereafter, what happened was that certification process is done by KPMG. So they are doing the certification process. While that is going on, actually we created an app as well. An app that we will incorporate into the immigration form. I'll explain that to you later. But what we have done is immediately help the tourists, then try to look at how do we help our stakeholders. The third side which we do is the guidelines and how we are preparing for eventual opening. Obviously the date is not set, but the eventual opening. And how do we keep the dream alive, if you like. How do we keep that dream alive? And so to that extent also we have taken several initiatives.
Thank you, madam. So it's very inspiring that you put all institutions together, making an app, going into the technology version. So I'll come back to you with another question later. So moving on to the Dr. Razia. Dr. Razia, so now WHO Sri Lanka has claimed that how we handle the process was kind of up to a certain level, not up to a certain level. It's one of the best practices that you all have taken in the world context. Why don't you elaborate a bit more on that, Doctor?
Thank you very much, and happy Tourism Day. Although these are trying times, and as was also elucidated in the speech of the chief guest, the Army General. So there were some steps that were taken. One was preparedness, having the political commitment, and having a very good foundation of a strong public health system, especially the preventative system, whereby you can do the contact tracing and the case identification and quick ramp up of the public health sector facilities in terms of the management of cases when they would come, because increasingly there was surge capacity, as we call it. And also talking to the community and informing public about it. So having regular, for example, press briefings from the Ministry of Health to say what is happening, what the situation is. So all these factors put together, it allowed the country to take the decisions and the actions. So even when there was a cluster, we were able to control the cluster, and that did not expand into a community transmission. Because just for the sake of the audience, there are 4 phases when we say what is the transmission level in a country. So one is when you have no cases. The other is sporadic cases that are only imported cases, or 1 or 2. The third is when you have clusters. And fourth is when you have community transmission where they are unlinked. You don't know where the cases have come from, and they come up. So Sri Lanka was there in this third phase, which is the clusters, where you know where the cases have come from. There is a epidemiological link. So that's why the contact tracing is important. And a multi-sectoral approach. The role of the tri-forces, the state intelligence in helping with the contact tracing. The strict quarantine, which really helped. These are the 2 very important factors that control the transmission at a cluster stage and did not allow it to spill over in the community, where then it becomes very difficult to manage.
Thank you, Doctor. So it was very interesting here from WHO point of view. They're talking about the multi-sectoral approach and also the strict contract tracing. So it's very, meaning as Sri Lankans, as nations, we have gone a little further. So now I'm moving to Ms. Simran Singh from ILO point of view, because she needs to deal with this local man day-to-day life, because in the context of tourism, we all are facing at a crisis. We all find to live, because we have so many issues in the jobs and so many job security issues and so on and so forth, especially social security. So why don't you elaborate what are the points that you are looking at from ILO point of view, just to enhance tourism in global perspective?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Not very well. That's much better. Thank you, and thank you for inviting the ILO, because yes, it's very important to also think of all the people that are employed in this industry. It's actually, I was seeing today's World Tourism Day, so happy Tourism Day, even though it's not a very happy time for tourism around the world. We're talking about 300 million jobs.
300 million jobs.
Yes, 300 million people employed in the tourism sector, the broad tourism sector around the world that have been affected by COVID.
Give me a second. So this is not a joke we are talking about. 300 million jobs we have lost in global context, including most of us.
So it's really, really serious. This was the bread and butter livelihoods of so many people, from big hotels and employees down to even those that were producing food or giving the massages or the Ayurvedic treatments to tourists. So it was a broad spectrum. And here in Sri Lanka, my understanding, and this is 2017, and I think the number went up higher, maybe Kamala, you know better, we're talking 11% of those employed in Sri Lanka were working in the tourism-associated food and accommodation services sector. So that's a lot of people here in Sri Lanka that have been affected, right? Yes, we kept talking about 5.6% of the GDP, and you can look at it from an economist's lens. I think that again was 2017. It was projected to keep going up quite high, but of course after the Easter attacks and now COVID, the GDP figures, we don't even want to discuss them, I think, anymore. So really, it's hurt the economy, but more and from my perspective, from the ILO perspective, it's hurt very much the workers as well as those that employ them. employ the workers, so the businesses as well, quite gravely. And, one of the things that we've observed here in Sri Lanka is that when we talk tourism, a lot of the workers and also those that are employing workers are not in the formal sector establishment. So they're not all part of, Taj Samudra and Marriott Hotel, not the big hotel chains. It's actually a lot of these smaller support services, whether it's the transportation services, whether it's the guides, whether it's the Ayurvedic therapy, medicine, it's so many other layers that have been affected that what I call the tourism ecosystem has been completely ruptured and quite destroyed. And I think that is really the area that is very tricky to help, because while, like Kimali was saying, it was good, you had concessions, you don't have to pay electricity bills or whatever, you might have subsidies and taxes. It doesn't always and hasn't actually reached those in the informal sector, which is those that are in these micro, small enterprises in the tourism sector. And that is a huge concern, and it remains a huge concern for the ILO. How do we get them out? Because a lot of them were already on the brink, right? You've introduced here financial stimulus packages that are supposed to be reaching these hard-hit businesses. But what we're finding, sadly, is that it's not reaching all of them, especially those in the micro enterprises. Why? Because sometimes, very often, it's a risk for them to reach and access that capital because they don't have collateral. So they don't have funds, right? They don't have any, they don't own things to be able to show as a guarantee. So there's multiple layers of vulnerability that existed pre-COVID, and now even with good attempts to try to reach them, unfortunately not all of them are being reached. So I think we do need sort of a really emergency, immediate response when it comes to the tourism sector in particular, but not just the tourism. This is across the board, micro, small enterprises across many sectors have suffered. And one sure way is to come up with a really robust employment income support scheme, which is broadly speaking a social protection or social security thing, something that Sri Lanka hasn't had. And many other countries have introduced it or had it and are doing much better that actually had it, which is to give immediate support to those hardest hit so that there's some money flowing so that they can get their business back in shape and get working, and then over time make it contributory and have, I'm not an economist, but there are different financial models to be able to have it not just be a one-off, welfare scheme, but actually one that generates revenue within itself, so contributory, and linked even more importantly and most importantly with labor market policies, where the jobs
Madam, give me a
will
second.
be.
So I will check how Madam Krimali feels. We want to hear from her point of view also, so that it will be very constructive.
Actually, thank you. We need to be careful because we have the formal sector which is registered with us now, and the informal sector, right? Now we say that very sort of liberally, but informal is actually illegal, right? It's illegal. It's illegal because now, say for example, you're driving a car. I know how to drive a car. You know how to drive a car, but I still have to get a license, right? So if I drive a car without a license, that's illegal. It's the same for tourism. Under the Tourism Act 2005, you are supposed to register. Now, when we say, informal sector is not getting any help from the government, that is because the informal sector did not register for different reasons. And we are helping about that, right? Because the guidelines were too strenuous and blah, blah, blah. We've corrected those now. So for the last 30 years, if you like, you've had only 2,500 and less than 2,500 registered accommodation. Only 2,500. Only 2,500 for the last 20, 30 years. That's it. But there were 20,000 also unregistered people. Okay? Now, they were unregistered for a reason. Because there were no branch for us to help. The guidelines were bad. But whatever it is, it's illegal. So we should have a system going forward where we help people as long as they are registered with us. If not, what happens is it will be prone to abuse. The system will be prone to abuse. That's one. And the informal sector, how most of them get their income, if you like, is they register with Booking.com, Airbnb, etc. So it's not a helpless situation, right? So people know how to put their pictures and whatever and do that. So they are not though paying taxes. Booking.com is also not paying the taxes. These people are also not paying the taxes. So we cannot reward somebody who is this thing, but I think we should capture them into the system and then support them. Yeah, you get it now, you know.
I fully agree with you. In fact, this is such an opportunity where we've had 20, 30 years of a problem trying to register people and get them into the formal, to actually use this as an incentive, of a way to say, wake up call, how can we get you in the system? And if they become beneficiaries of some of these kind of income support schemes, then automatically it creates a chain reaction of you being registered, you're getting Social Security, you're getting into the revenue system to pay the taxes that you need, and then inspection services can also be given to you and things. So yeah, this is really why this is important to start now, but with a longer term vision of how can you actually clean up this whole thing that's been so hard to clean up for 30, 40 years.
That's right, and also to make sure that they contribute as well.
Absolutely.
Because it should not be that you have a social protection and then you see this, people are smart. So what happens, you'll have a university student, right? He or she will go to university and then she will come and get a guide, do a guide course with me, but never work as a guide ever. Then they will come social protection and they will have multiple jobs. So we need to make sure, one, they register with us, two, they contribute something, small thing, even a token, and three, that they can show evidence that they've worked in our industry. Some kind of evidence must be shown. Right now we have social protection for fisheries, for farmers. There is social protection for students. So I think some kind of I'm not an expert, but some study needs to be done on this.
Yeah, that was about the last point. I just wanted to respond on that, because what this idea with social protection and the employment support scheme is that at the end of the road, so you start to contribute to this. You don't just keep getting money doled out at you. You start contributing when you start building back. But it has to be then linked with active labor market policies. So at the end of the road, you are in a job, right? You are employed so that you're able to then continue to contribute, and preferably in a job where there's a demand for your services. So this is where it's very important. Also, in Sri Lanka, we do have this issue of many people wanting to go the public administration route. That's where most of the training is. But I think, again, COVID has brought us to really look at where the skills need to be built, including expanded, reoriented, and maybe in terms of wellness tourism, as you were saying, Dr. Chandrika. How can we actually invest in areas where we can be premium here in Sri Lanka? And those are the trainings that are needed for those that have been hardest hit. I was going to say also, in terms of informal sector right now, many in the craft sector that are supplying, in the Negombo areas and all that have been hard hit, they are very much, but how can we renovate that? Because the arts and crafts sector of Sri Lanka is have such contemporary designs that are in demand and can start supplying things even not just to tourists coming in, but to Crate and Barrels and IKEAs of the world. So there's a lot of potential for us to be really thinking more creatively, including in terms of repurposing existing tourism sector workers beyond just those that are working in hotels, which I see you are doing. So I'm very happy to be working with you on that.
And also, before moving to the professor, I want to again, we'll stick on this point bit because it's a very interesting area. So in your initial stages, when you're featuring in international media, you said wellness tourism will be your next move, and also niche tourism. And you said Ratmalani International Airport will become the private jet terminal and things like that. So this will connect with these things, right? So it'll always, you can get all these sectors together, work forward, and make multi-sectorial effect. Why don't you elaborate more on that?
Absolutely. Wellness tourism we have never really promoted in Sri Lanka. It's sort of grown on its own, and people have marketed it, private sector have marketed it. The EU has agreed to give us some funding for the promotion aspect. So we have already done a terms of reference for that. They have done a research as well. Now research is really important because, the world it's a 7 billion, 9, whatever the amount of people. So those days what we used to do is when we promoted something, we said, okay, China or India, or we looked at a country, Germany or whatever. So we promoted a country. But now what we are doing is we are looking at more so the kind of a person. What is the age group? What kind of a profile? What are the interests? And then pitch in a country for that. Now wellness also we've already finished the research that was done, actually that was funded by EU and another foreign agency. They funded it, so they have done a research, and that's like 80 to 90 million German speaking market. It's not only Germany, that German speaking market, it's about 90 million people. They've researched that and said what would appeal to them. So we are going to go ahead, we've done the terms of reference, we will go ahead and do the promotion for the German market. Now Middle East also is an important market for Sri Lanka for wellness. Japan is another important market for wellness. So these are areas that we will work with the private sector as well, and how to promote in each country. The niche products, you correctly said, and I think Army Commander mentioned it from being he mentioned it. I was pleased to see about the need for niche markets and so on. Absolutely. So I think post-COVID, this is something we need to look at. Whether it is mass scale tourism which we are going to do, which will be unlikely and not be sustainable, I think. So I think Sri Lanka, we should look at those niche products, whether it is adventure, whether it is wellness, whether it is sports, all that. And it's not that, you as a private sector, you say, tourism board, you do it. It's a two-way, because they have to have the product. If they don't have the product, absurd me more promoting it. So it has to be a two-way thing. Like now, for example, if you go to Mirisa, Arugambe, all these areas, I mean, you would see a particular type of clientele who comes. And so we need to focus on that also. And people say, oh, we don't want backpackers. I disagree. I think we need all types of tourists in our country. We need all types of tourists. But we need to pitch our product a little bit better so that our product becomes aspirational. You aspire to go to our country. Like Maldives, people aspire to go to Maldives. Now I met the Korean ambassador some months ago, before COVID, January. And I said, why is it that Korean Airlines comes to Sri Lanka? Hardly anyone from Korea gets out. All of them go to Maldives. So I asked him the question, why? Why are these people not getting off? And he, very polite gentleman, the ambassador, but he explained to me that the branding, our branding, how they perceive, particular Asia, they are very much into branding and what is perceived as high end, what is perceived as luxury, whatever. So we need to put our product, not that it will be too expensive, but pitch it in a way that it is aspirational, right? Because even you and me, we would get a product that is aspirational, right? Now if you take a BMW or whatever, it's not high end, very high end, but it's high, relatively high. People aspire to get that vehicle. It's an aspirational product, right? There are other vehicles which are as good, works really well, but it's not an aspirational product. You see, so when you're aspirational, people, you're on their bucket, you put them on the bucket list. One day I want to go and see this country. So we need to pitch that. And it doesn't mean marble floors and whatever. It means unique, something unique. Whether it's a tree house, whether it is on a cave, whether it is now tree houses till we came in January, they were not registered. They were never registered in Sri Lanka tourism. We never registered them. Now we are registering them. So that's what I'm saying. It doesn't mean marble floors and a boutique hotel or 5-star at all. It means something unique,
This again, the criteria. Of course, you are reviewing the criteria. So that's another thing that we really want to see, because when you look at Sri Lanka tourism as a product, our criteria is a bit old-fashioned. Yeah.